Please listen carefully.
Hi, I'm Paul Fields.
I'm Dave Guzman.
And welcome to Practical Bass, where each week we pick a topic of interest to you, the working bassist, and we sort of take it apart and look at it from a bunch of different angles and try and cast our own experiences on it. And we also invite you, our listeners, to please come back to us with discussion, with your critiques, with your comments and your input on these topics. We're also open to your suggestions for additional topics for feedback as well. You can do this in a number of ways. One of the easiest ways is to get on Facebook and look for the Practical Bass group. You're welcome to join up and join the conversation with the many bass players who are already listening to the podcast. And we'd love to have some discussion about this or any kind of topic that turns you on as a bass player, anything that you'd like to discuss. We are into that. You can also email us if Facebook or groups are not your thing. If they're not your bag, baby, then just email us at podcast@practicalbass.com. You can visit the website at practicalbass.com and look for the feedback link and email us there as well. We're also on Google+. We are on Twitter and Instagram. Send us pictures of your rig or, action shots at the gig or whatever. We are here to help you elevate that gig and elevate your gear to the next level. So this week, what are we going to talk about, Dave?
Paul, we're gonna dive into the topic of cable placement on stage. Is that the best way to lay that one out?
It's very specific.
Stage placement on Thursdays.
On Thursdays after 7.
After 7.
Yeah.
This is definitely got to be one of the topics that I suggested because this sounds like, one of those OCD things for me.
It sounds like you had a bad experience that you really wanted to relate and you were just waiting for your chance to I got to tell people what happened to me.
Right.
So I got to ask, and maybe, I don't know, we probably wrote this a while ago, but tell me about we're not going to, by the way, just so nobody gets scared and turns this off or something like that. We're not going to be that specific, but we are going to talk about cables and how you run cables and how they affect your gig. I mean, they're a big part of getting your sound to where it's going, unless you're one of these people who's everything's wireless and if you got that kind of money and time and technicians,
awesome.
Good for you, go with God. But, I think the rest of us are, we're all stringing wires.
Yeah, we're still plugged in.
Yeah, we're all plugged in. So,
old school.
Yeah. So what happened? What happened in your past? Tell me about tell me about a cable story that went bad.
Gosh, cable stories. I mean, which one? So, I think a lot of musicians do. I've got a cable thing, right? Cable is just a part of our life. But, definitely had a situation where, sometimes the stage is set on the floor, right? So your stage area, there is no raised stage area. It's
No,
sort of
you're
and this
there.
is where the band plays in that part of the room.
Right.
And, usually we run, XLR mics kind of all the way across to whatever soundboard on the other side of the stage from where I'm at.
Yeah.
And
because you're not usually doing sound. Usually there's another guy who's doing sound.
Correct.
And he's on the other side from you.
Exactly. Just kind of the way that we lay out our placement. And so for whatever reason, it was kind of sloppily laid, and it must have been me, right? I can't blame anybody. So it was just the way I had my cable down. Maybe it was twisted in a way or whatever. And there was also the dance floor happened to be basically right in front of the band, right?
Yeah.
It's a small, tight spot. And we had a great show and people were dancing. That's super cool. And one person was leaving the dance floor.
Yeah.
And they took, they took my mic.
They took your...
You
don't mean they walked up and took your mic?
Maybe it was intentional, but I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt and just say that literally their foot just caught the cable and they walked off, and their response time was not quick because maybe they had one or two beverages, and they just walked off the stage and just brought my whole mic with it.
Yeah, your whole stand goes whoop.
There it is.
Oh no!
It wasn't life or death, but I think it's when you're dealing with cables a lot. You just get kind of tuned into like that, that process of the setup and breakdown and setup and breakdown. And kind of, I don't know. Have you ever had any nightmare cable stories?
Well, so, the weird thing is I don't think I've had like a bad cable story. I've had so many other things, but I can tell you, but it's just luck of the draw, right? I mean, now that I've said that, like next gig, I guarantee something's going to go wrong with cables. I'm going to be like, that silly cable, wah, wah, wah.
Somebody trips on a cable, falls off the stage.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so I can tell you about one that happened to a friend of mine that I was playing with. And actually, I didn't make this gig just by scheduling reasons. He ended up having another bass player with him, and it was a big festival gig. And it was big. There were like, I think 3,000 or 4,000 people there. Right. So, it was sizable. And he had run his cable straight from his guitar back to his amp, back to the backline or whatever. But it was a pretty big stage. And he did one of those moves where he was really into it. And I could not have seen him doing this. I couldn't visualize it, but this is what happened because the drummer told me about it later. Right. He did one of those things where you kind of get really into it. And then he went down on his knees and kind of slid across the stage on his knees while he's soloing.
Sweet. The Back to the Future thing.
Yeah. He literally did a Marty McFly move or whatever. And I don't think he meant this to happen. I'm pretty sure, but he's at the climax of the solo or whatever. He's goes down his knees and slides across the stage, and the guitar came unplugged right then. Just
right at the peak.
Just that was it. And right in the middle of the song, and everybody else keeps going and it's a trio. So it was really noticeable. Oh, no more guitar.
1/3 of the band is gone.
Yeah. So, so that would not have been fun. So that happened.
Right. Which kind of leads to one aspect of this is just making sure that you've got your stage covered.
Yeah. You got to know, how big is this area we're going to be playing in? What are we going to do to, our backline may not be right up next to us. How do we make sure that we can get from here to there? I'm pretty sure that, this particular gig I was talking about, they were opening for they were one band out of maybe 4 at this, festival lineup, and they're probably an early one. And, and just, they didn't expect the stage to be, that large.
Yeah.
It helps to know,
right.
What you're walking into. But if you don't know, have some gear with you to cover that. If you need, instead of a 20, an 18 or 20 foot cable or whatever, I need a 35 foot instrument cable or whatever.
Right.
Having one of those can be really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was just, we just played an event that was 4 bands lined up, and, it was a big outdoor stage. And all I had to do, is just basically I always bring my amp just in case, but I just had to bring my bass and plug into the back line and set and ready to go. And I brought just because I slimmed down, I only had my sort of small stage setup.
Yeah.
Which is just they're just shorter cables.
Yeah.
And now I'm basically stuck with the bass amp is on the back of the stage.
Yeah.
And even chained through my guitar cables, not long enough. And I had to kind of wonky setup thing to stretch it. So my pedals were 5 feet back.
Yeah.
Looked ridiculous.
Right.
Because I wasn't prepared. Because there's that whole thing of are you going to have every single cable with you? Sometimes it's good to have a crate of just in casers.
Yeah. Yeah. And that might be some really long instrument cables. And there's a limit to this, right? You can't, once you get to a certain length,
sure.
If people haven't heard it, they should check out our previous show about pickups. And I think one of the things we talked about was, the fact that, your instrument basically puts out, even active instruments put out a pretty low level signal.
Yeah.
And, especially passive instruments though, put out a low signal, and, you can only put that through so many feet of cable before it starts to really affect the sound.
Right.
So it's not just pick up 100-foot instrument cable. When it gets to the end of the amp, it might be basically all buzz and no,
no action.
Yeah, exactly.
You're all buzz and no action. Just like everybody else.
Yeah. Oh my God. That's the Practical Bass t-shirt. All buzz and no action. That's amazing.
I knew we were going to come up with a tagline.
But there are ways you can get around that too, right? Like, if you have to chain things together, there are like SGI makes this thing called a radial, or not radial, or it is, sorry. Radial makes it and called SGI. It's a SGI pair, and it's basically like these two direct boxes, and they're basically designed to like lift your signal up onto a balanced line.
Oh, okay.
And then pick it up at the other end, so you can run like a 50-foot microphone cable or something like that.
Yeah.
Or whatever length you need, however many of these cables that you want to chain together. Like you can have like a couple of them, just daisy chained. On the other end, you've got an equal box with the opposite side, the opposite gender input. Plug the XLR in there, and then you take the 1/4 inch, runs it, and then run it to your amp.
Yeah,
and it lifts the signal up so that you can actually make that length work.
Wow.
But then you're going to be plugged into something that's up front on the stage, and you can, then now you've got like a 15 or 18 or whatever foot, radius you can use there instead of being stuck at the back of the stage.
Exactly. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's one thing, the thing that you ran into, though, with the mic is people moving around the stage or whatever. And, it pays to know whether you're the guy, trying to be in the right place or the guy who's going to do the Marty McFly move.
Right.
Kind of know ahead of time.
Are you the slider?
Where are we going to be? Like, what if you'd been sliding and like cables are run like that part of the stage, there's a bunch of cables run from the back to the front.
Yeah.
And so you slide over and then you just kind of stop when you hit the cables, like you bump into them.
Well, I guess it'll stop you from like falling off the stage. Too.
Yeah. No,
which could be cool.
Yeah. You could use them like a guardrail.
Yeah. A bumper. Like the bowling lane bumpers.
Bowling road. Yeah. What was that? That was like our first or second episode that you're calling back to.
Wow.
The
throwback.
Bumpers on the...
Literally a throwback.
Yeah.
Down the lane.
Bumpers on the bowling lanes of life.
Right. What was I even talking about?
Oh my goodness.
Who am I?
I had to dig back in the catalog for that one. Holy moly.
Yeah.
So there's this idea of how you handle the space, right? And where you lay the cables, where you need to be moving.
Yeah.
My personal opinion is like, I always like to, lay, cables in a certain way. Like I like to get them, most of the stages or areas that I'm playing are not super big. Right. And so I try and limit, like, I don't want cables flying all over the place.
Yeah.
Like, I like to limit that, but but those sound cables, right, that I'm running for the sound system are not the only cables involved, right? Like we've been talking about instrument cables here a bit. How do you deal with the, like where you plug in, right? Because that clearly happened to this dude, right? Like that, he just basically like, got to the end and, it just popped out.
Right.
So
just like that.
Just like that made that sound probably. How do you deal with, how do you deal with the cable at the ends of the length?
I think, so to your point, most of the shows that I'm playing are going to be on smaller stages, right? And I do think about what that looks like in, what space I'm going to need and for what gig, right? Certain gigs, I know all I need is like a 4x4 space.
Right.
Right. I'm not going anywhere else besides there. Like that's kind of my zone.
Yeah.
I could even shorten it up, but in general, like 4 feet by 4 feet, kind of have this like magic square of a space. And I just make sure all my cables are away from there. And I use exactly, like I try to get as close as I can to getting the length of the cable where I have enough slack to move.
Yeah.
And no excess.
Right.
And for me, that happens to be, I get basically a couple of 12-foot cables. Yep. 2 of them, one goes to my pedal board. So from where I'm at to my pedal board.
Right.
That's whatever. That's only like 3.5 feet or whatever that measurement is. And then the rest of it is just the slack that I can use.
Yeah, so you can, if you need to move back, talk to the drummer or whatever.
Yeah, and I'm not tripping on it.
Yep.
Right? And then the other 12-foot is basically headed back right directly into my amp.
So from the out of the pedal board back to your amp.
Yeah, and that keeps it nice and clean. And I take everything that I have, like any other, like if I can, my XLR, the power cord to my pedal board.
Yep.
And I put them in a way that's always like together.
Yeah.
And I kind of route them all away so that I know exactly where they're at. I'll know if I'm stepping on one because I'm going to step on 3 or 4 of them.
Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of like my border and they're all out of the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's nothing worse for me than like having that like annoying thing of stepping on a cable like mid song and you keep stepping on it and it just like changes the vibe. Yeah. You're like, where am I?
And if there's a lot of it, right, the danger, you start thinking about, is my foot like in a loop now? What's going to happen when I move? Am I going to like trip or pull something out?
And it'll happen, you know? Yeah.
It's not fun.
Yeah, so that's kind of how I'm managing. And that's just, I try to keep it simple, but I need a clean space. That's probably the most important thing, for me.
Yeah, I think, for me, to be honest, like I really feel like I need to do something different cable-wise than what I'm doing now. Mm-hmm. So I have the way I'm wiring things right now, basically, I'm running from my base to the amp head. Right?
Okay.
And then I'm using the effects loop for my effects setup. And so that's basically 3 cables. And there are 3 cables that have to go from where I am back to my amp.
Yeah.
Right? There's my base to the amp, and then there's the effects send back to my pedal where I am, and then from my pedal where I am, a return back to the amp. So that's 3, right?
Right.
And I've been thinking it would be really cool if I would like maybe rebalance my effects unit or something to where I just plug into my pedal and then run one thing from my pedal back to my amp.
Right.
Making that work is tricky though, because of how the amps are wired can make that a tricky thing. But I really like your idea of like having something shorter so you're not like, you don't have all this cable around you. I think that's a good point.
Well, I went through that same process too, probably just about 6 months ago or so, where I stopped the effects loop and I got around it.
Yeah.
Just because it was just too many cables to deal with on stage.
Yep.
So for my, run of the mill gigs, the regular weekly stuff that I'm doing, I just want to simplify it. So I'm just running that one line, direct. Because if not, then you have like all these like different paths, and then it starts to become like a situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you have to like deal with like,
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, from my point of view, the way I deal with the ends, right, of of whatever the run is, right, the amp and the bass. So the bass, I do a couple things. Like I try and always have like right angle connectors on whatever my instrument cable is.
Okay, right.
Because that way, now this is easier to do with some basses than others. Like there are some basses out there that have these recessed jacks that are really sleek and look cool, but using right angle connectors doesn't really work on them. They're actually recessed and built so that you can stick a straight, cord into them and it works well.
Right.
But most of the basses that I have are not like that. They're like they're a surface mount either on the front or on the side. And if I get a right angle connector, the thing is it's going to be less stress on the jack if the cable gets yanked in some way.
Right.
It's not going to immediately it's not going to break the cable.
Yeah.
It's not going to yank the output jack out or whatever. So I do that. The other thing is I always loop the cable around my strap.
Right.
Right. So like do one loop around before I plug it in. And the only reason to do that is that you get, there's a couple of reasons, right? Like one of them is, the stress relief, right? Because you're not going to be like dragging the cable off of the bass with nothing relieving that.
Yeah.
The stress in the cable. The other thing about it is it's an early warning, right? If things start getting tight, you get to the end of the length, you're going to know it, and you're going to know it for a reason other than like it yanking out of your bass.
Right. Right. You'll just feel the end of the line.
You get the stress before it gets like critical and you end up in an emergency.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of the same concept of like, if you ever use like any sort of like yard tools that have extension cords that are actually electric, like a weed whacker or an electric lawnmower, like all these tools that kind of have like a little hook right by the handle, so it plugs the extension cord plugs in.
Yeah.
But then has a hook to like
to
just catch it before, so you have that like
Yeah.
even if you do hit the end of the line, it's not yanking you out, it's just stopping.
Right.
You know, it's locking you before you get there.
Right. And so that you don't like the first thing you know is that you pulled it out of the plug 100 feet away.
Right.
Something. Everything like stops. You're like, oh. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's really the same. It is exactly the same concept. So, and then at the amp, I kind of do a similar thing where I route the cable through, like I'll either go through a handle or something that is going to stay put. That's not going to be, not something that's going to like fall off the top,
right?
But like the amp handle itself or something like that, like the cabinet handle, or at worst, I have a Velcro tie on that end, and then I'll fasten that to the cabinet, the fuzzy, the fuzzy covering on the cabinet, so that, again, there's just like a warning. If I'm stepping away, you get a little warning before things pull out.
Yeah. I like that. You know what? I'll use that one.
And the
Velcro's on almost, I mean, I have Velcro ties on each one of my cables anyway. So just slide it on that end.
Yeah. Yeah, and I kind of do the same thing where I'll pull up and then I'll leave a little slack too, so that it's not like immediately the Velcro falls out, like it's not going to take the cable with it immediately.
Right.
So and cool. And finally, I think for me, I totally agree with like grouping lines and so forth, like trying to bring them together. And then I always, if I'm going to do sound or whatever, always have gaffer's tape with me. To roll the gaffer's tape. If people out there haven't done it, gaffer's tape is not duct tape, and you do not want duct tape involved with your cables. Believe me, that is horrible because it leaves that sticky goo on all your cables, and you can never get rid of it.
Yeah, forever.
It is the worst.
Yeah, I still have cables from like 15 years ago that still have it, and I just don't use them because it's like it's just all sticky.
Yeah, like
it's a sticky situation.
If I run into a sound situation where I'm like, somebody shows up and they've got like cables that are like full of duct tape and whatnot, I'm like, this is not a high class operation because they clearly don't know.
Right.
Don't do the duct tape. So the gaffer's tape is great though. So it's cloth backed.
Right.
You can get it in all sorts of colors and stuff. We'll put a link in the show notes. But it's very adherent, or adhesive. Like you can, you can stick it to wood, you can stick it to glass, you can stick it to metal, whatever, your cables, you can, bind up your cables in it, but it's easy to rip with your hands. If you just, apply a little bit of strength, you can rip it like you can duct tape.
Yeah.
And when you take it off, it doesn't leave anything behind.
Right.
So you can put it down on floors at a venue, whether it's tile, wood, or whatever, and you're not going to leave anything behind, and you're not going to make the venue people unhappy with you. You're not going to have sticky cables.
Right.
So it's pretty, but yet it'll stay put, as long as the gig goes.
Yeah. I actually knew nothing about gaffer's tape until you mentioned it some time ago, and I was like, what is this gaffer's? What is this?
What is this gaffer's tape of which you speak, sir?
Then I was like, oh man, that is another miracle. That's right up there with Post-it notes. Genius.
It is genius. It's amazing. Yeah. So, I guess, just some, and some tips, maybe we can share some tips with people about how to deal with their cable routing. I always say, like, don't be stingy with the tape. Tape is not that expensive.
Right.
Like, you can get like 30 yards of this stuff for like $15 or something like that. You don't need to be stingy with it. Use it to hold, tape down your stuff every few feet.
Yep.
Right. Cause like the worst thing I can see doing is like, I'm going to tape it over here. And then I'm going to tape it like, 10 feet over here. And all that means is basically now you've got like this big area that's not secured that anybody could like stick a toe under and take, gaffer's tape, just like duct tape. It's not, it's not like padlocking stuff down with, with a weight or something. It is just tape. And if somebody's going to like put 150 or 200 pounds of body weight, moving that cable's going to move. Tape
yeah. Oh yeah. Gaffer's is going to break. Yeah.
Yeah. So, putting it every few feet means it's a lot harder for people to run into it and like grab that slack with their foot or, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when we're looking at layout too, if you can, sometimes it's not possible, but the long stuff that's going around, just try to keep it around like the edges or the perimeters of your stage, and preferably in the back side if you can.
Yeah.
Right. If you have that length to go kind of around the back of the stage, keep it away from, whatever's in front of you and your space.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant idea. Running around the perimeter, like the perimeter of the stage, wherever it is, means it's going to be out of everybody's way as much as possible. That means sometimes it means that you got to be set up. You may have to plan out like who's going to get here first and who's going to run this, who's going to run that. The other good thing about running the perimeter like that is if you're running around the front, if you have a stage, it's great, right? Because it means kind of, you're going to be in good shape. But if you don't have a stage, if you just have that area that you're in, if you bring the cables around the perimeter like that, and tape them down like we're saying, the nice thing about it is it kind of makes, there's like a mental barrier.
Yep.
This is the line that you don't cross.
Right.
When you have that one patron who's like had a really good time and they want to get on the mic, you're like, no, this is the line.
Yeah, that's it.
Don't cross the line.
Yeah. My side, that's your side.
Yeah,
man.
Exactly. Well, it's as good a place to stop as any. So we hope you guys have enjoyed this chat about cables. That went pretty deep. I didn't expect to have that much to say about cable, but good for us.
Oh yeah.
I hope people hung in there.
Hey, you guys are welcome, by the way, because we did have to cut out 20 minutes of material.
Yeah.
So you're welcome.
They'll never know from the editing. Yeah, exactly. Well, we hope that you guys will actually pitch into the conversation too. Join up on our Facebook group and, start a conversation there or discuss with the other working bassists who are part of the Practical Bass community. This is our way of giving back to you guys and thanking people for helping sustain us and for being part of the worldwide community of bass players. If you'd like to talk to us personally, you can do that at podcast@practicalbass.com, or you can visit the practicalbass.com website and go to the feedback area. We read everything that comes in there, so do get in touch. We're also happy to hear about topics that you guys would like to hear discussed. We love getting your ideas, and we do deliver on those, as I think a few listeners can attest to. The main thing you can do to help the podcast grow is subscribe and share. To subscribe is really easy. Just use the Podcasts app on your iPhone, your Google Play Music app on an Android device, iTunes on your Mac computer, or Stitcher Radio on any platform. Just search for Practical Bass, use the function in the app and look for Practical Bass, and then use the subscribe link, and you'll get a new episode delivered to you fresh every week with whatever the topic of the week is. And moreover, we would love it if you would share that with other bass players and other musicians in general. Just let us have a chance to encourage them to join the discussion and let them know this is something that you enjoy and pass it on. Pass on the love. Sharing is caring, as they say. So until next time, I'm Paul Fields.
And I'm Dave Guzman.
And this has been Practical Bass.
Thanks for listening. I think at that time when they were cable guys were it was a big thing, right?
Yeah.
And there was zero training or whatever. Their job was basically to get your TV connected to some telephone pole. And I swear there were some situations I've seen where some dude's drilling a hole at eye level in the wall all the way through the house and just stringing a cable from your TV through the siding and then up to the telephone pole. You're like, oh, that's some really high level craftsmanship up there. He must have been an engineer.
Right.
Engineer, the cable guy.